that will be posted and live in perpetuity. So let us remember our decorum. It's nice to see everybody. I do miss in-person meetings, but for the safety of all of us, we are continuing to meet via Zoom. Summer is almost over. Today definitely feels like a fall day, and we have done a really nice job as a community and as a state to stay safe and get our numbers down from a COVID-19 perspective. So I think we should all feel good about the community and the state of Massachusetts that we live in, and keep our prayers for those who are still suffering or may be suffering. So thanks everyone for being here. At this point, I'm going to open up the meeting and ask for any discussion around the minutes, and ask for a motion to approve them.
So moved.
A second?
Seconded.
Okay, great. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our general counsel to take roll call vote.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Andrew?
Commissioner Sullivan,
Yes.
Commissioner Kaplan,
Yes.
Designee Jew Williams,
Yes.
Designee Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapdelaine,
Yes.
Commissioner Choate,
Present.
Commissioner Clenard.
Here.
I assume those present and here were affirmative votes.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Davis, we'll come back to Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Edmonds,
Here.
is that affirmative?
Yes.
Commissioner Gentile,
Yes.
Commissioner McEnany,
Yes.
Commissioner Jennings. Oh, she's not present yet. Commissioner Murphy Rodriguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Sinenko,
Yes.
and Commissioner Timothy Sullivan.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Davis, Commissioner Davis is on the phone and must be having some difficulty.
All right. Well, do we have enough?
The commission, yes, the vote passed unanimously from those who were able to vote. So.
Andrew, can you hear me?
There you are.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Now it passes
Phone.
unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, commissioners. At this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Matt, our executive director. So hi, Matt.
Hello, Madam Chair, and hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us. It's really a thrill again, actually, to see everybody. I know I, like everybody else, is sort of continuing to deal with the challenge, right, of doing all the work that we need to do, not being in the same space. So I really, really look forward to, once again, an in-person meeting at some point with our granola bars and bottles of water sitting around a table. So I really look forward to that. I will say, as somebody who does occasionally still come into the office, our large, almost entirely empty office on any given day, it is nice on a day like today that to see a few of my colleagues here who we do have come into the office so that we can just make sure that all the technical aspects of the meeting go well. So it's really nice to see a few friendly faces around. So thank you so much for joining us. So we have a full agenda here today, and I'm sure you have all seen it. I'm going to start off with the director's report. So, yep, that's good. Thank you. So as we have in the last few meetings, and I'm at the chair's recommendation, we'll continue to do this, to have a number of members of the senior team here at the GIC to provide some of the updates so that you don't simply hear me drone on for 25 minutes. They can cover their areas much better than I could. So we're going to start off a little bit out of order. We would typically take the calendar up first. It's second here. I'm actually going to put that towards the end. And we're going to start off with a human resources update. And this is really just as an opportunity to acknowledge Joan Matsumoto's departure from the GIC team, which happened this summer. And then we'll proceed with the rest of the agenda. But I have a few words to say. I'm sure the chair and other members of the commission have a few words to say as well. So when I was thinking about what I was going to say about Joan this morning, it occurred to me that, with some surprise again, that I really only known her for a little over a year. It seems odd because we worked together so much in that short period of time. So I'll apologize in advance that my comments might seem a little over the top, acknowledging someone who's really who was at the GIC for a short period of time. And I should just note that Joan, I should have said this at the outset, Joan has joined us here today too. So I'm going to see if I can make her blush, see if I can do that on the screen. So for me, Joan was one of those people that you sort of instantly click with, and feels like you've known this person for much longer than you actually have. And I don't know whether it's because we both have fathers who were surgeons, who actually, it turns out, we think may have trained at Tufts Medical School at the same time, which is kind of an interesting thing, or her knowledge of Monty Python, which occasionally would come up and be very quotable at times. But we really clicked, and it gave me a great deal of confidence landing here that I was going to be able to work so closely with her. And I will, so I do want to say sort of 4 things that I think make Joan a really extraordinary public servant and a natural leader. Number 1, she listens to understand, which I think is more and more a rare skill or personality trait. She's approaches an issue, whether we're dealing with it at the commission or internally, not to make a point or to drive an agenda, but it's really listening that's kind of rooted in 2 things. 1, a humility that any of us as individuals don't know everything, and others have a great deal to contribute to the work that we do as a group, but also that those contributions can really produce a better outcome. So listening to understand, I think, is sort of number 1 for her. The ability to translate complex subject matter into accessible, understandable language, not an easy thing for any of us who have been involved in communications and its various elements. Known for her really creative analogies, whether it's talking about our the challenge of our product portfolio with a number of different plan options, but not really wide variation in what those plan offerings look like. She'd call that a dozen different types of vanilla. So always had an ability to sort of capture a complex topic in a way that would really stick. She's got a relentless commitment to making things operate efficiently. It's something that was extraordinarily helpful here and will, of course, position her well in her new role. But I always thought of it as helping me move the work through the organization, particularly the priority work, so that we didn't lose track of what was most important. But ultimately, and this I think is the most important thing, is that she never lost sight of the fact that sort of people are at the center of what we do. Our members, our staff, and everything that we do as leaders really has to come from that core. So I don't think it's hyperbole for me to say that Joan represents the best of public service. She's a believer, as I am, that government is a real force for good, and we can do a lot to help people, but also that we do the most good and we help the most people when we insist on a high degree of excellence in the work that we do. It's really our obligation as those in public service to make sure that we do the work as best we can. She is, of course, very well suited for her new assignment, where she'll play a key role in helping organizations like the GIC reimagine what our workforce environment is going to look like as we emerge from COVID. And as we at the GIC are poised to be among the first agencies to transition to this newly reimagined workforce environment, it gives me a great deal of confidence knowing that she's there and will play a key role in helping us make that transition. So I'm also reassured knowing that she's only a phone call away and is committed to picking up the phone when she can. So at this point, it's probably appropriate for me to reassure you that we haven't missed a beat since she's left. But if I'm honest, I have to say, I've missed a few beats, Joan, since you've left. And this is where I can really thank my staff for stepping up, bearing with me in over the last several weeks, where as we've kind of made the adjustments necessary to accommodate her departure. We have a lot going on, as we'll talk about in this agenda. We're moving into our health benefit procurement, so there's a lot of work that we have to do there. We're looking at moving office space, a tremendously big lift and important to our work. We're looking at adding significant new functionality to my GIC link and moving our modernization agenda here. But I do want to reassure you that we really have a resilient organization. And I think we saw that very clearly when we dealt with the COVID-19 crisis that landed on us right before annual enrollment. Sometimes we still talk about how amazing it is. Like, we still can't believe we quite pulled it off as smoothly as we did, to be honest. But it's a resilient organization, and we're making the adjustments necessary to keep our work moving forward. So I'm going to close there. This is really an opportunity more to say thank you to Joan. And the thing, I'll close just by saying about her, a compliment that I heard somebody utter about somebody else a while back that felt like one of the highest compliments, which is as a leader, she leads with her heart. And thank you for doing that for the time period that you were here and continuing to do it for the state. So with that, I'll hand it over briefly to Valerie, and then we can
I'll be
let
brief.
Joan say a word. Thanks.
I'll be brief. I know we don't want to go over on a Zoom meeting. I tend to be the timekeeper as I reviewed the notes from last meeting. But, Joan, you're terrific. I have really appreciated getting to know you. I thought you did an absolutely marvelous job stepping in when Roberta left, and, the organization didn't miss a beat. I thought you were fabulous at the listening sessions, the way you connected with our members. You shared what commissioners wanted to share with the members, and I loved that. And I loved seeing you in action after just a short period of time. Your leadership, your ability to listen, as Matt said, and I loved how you're able to get results through the good work of our staff. So I'm definitely going to miss you. I'm glad you finally got a camera on your laptop when it was time to leave us, because I have missed seeing you through this pandemic. And now that I know that you're a Monty Python fan, I'm going to look for that quick wit the next time we talk. So thank you for all the commissioners. Thank you for, doing what you do best. We are definitely going to miss you. And I want to wish you only the best. And Emily, please take care of Joan in A&F. I'm a little jealous, but thank you, Joan.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you, Chair Sullivan, for your kind words. I really am quite humbled. Mostly, I want to say thank you to the staff who, although I only worked with you for a year, I can't begin to tell you how much respect I have for you. The people that I'm working with now on the transformation project are subject to stories about GIC every day, talking about how fantastic you folks are in moving toward that maximum resiliency. And I just want to say that my job was very easy in terms of having an incredible staff with such a wide and deep level of expertise, joined with a lot of passion for the mission. I know that this remote work is what is really magnifying how much we miss the energy of people who reinforce our commitment to public service every day. But I just want to acknowledge that the level of knowledge and expertise and passion at GIC is really quite incredible. For just almost exactly 1 year of service at that agency, I come away so impressed with people's dedication to serving members. And I will tell you that my first encounter was watching Shirley Riviere walk around reception with a headset on and manage within the span of 15 minutes 4 complex questions. Everything from somebody who wanted to file their retirement papers, which for her is fairly routine, to literally a merchant marine who had come from his ship to talk about potential options as he moved forward in his post-public service life. The ease and grace with which she handled each customer and the complexity was just the beginning of being introduced to people who I don't quite know how to say it, who are have drunk the grape juice and really believe that helping members navigate this complex part of their lives, which they usually come to in a crisis, is everything. So kudos to everyone at GIC. And I also have full confidence that with the level of expertise you have with folks like Denise Donnelly, who's going to help lead you toward your new procurement, the incredible Indiana Jones secret archive of knowledge that Paul Murphy has, all the way down the line. I want to say thank you for the opportunity. I have gained so much more than I provided to you. And I'm moving forward with you guys as kind of the example. So get ready.
Right.
You're
Well,
going to see yourself.
Thank you, Joan. Let's have a round of applause virtually, but congratulations. Thank you. And,
thank you so much.
Let's be in touch. You'll always be part of our team here. All right, back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Joan, for joining us, and really wish you nothing but the best in your next endeavor. So moving on to the next agenda, the director's report. Again, we'll come back to the calendar at the end of this section. There's a few items I want to touch on in the area of COVID-19. And I want to start by just acknowledging that it's probably the obvious, but we are continuing to work primarily remotely, our entire staff. ANF announced in August that agencies, including the GIC, will continue to work remotely through the end of the calendar year. I would tell you that that continues to be largely a relief to staff, not to have to take public transport or get in their car and drive into the city. So we continue to keep the work of the organization moving forward efficiently in this environment. We do still have a handful of members of the mailroom team who come in a few days a week to make sure that the volume of mail, which is incidentally decreasing over time, which is good news for a lot of reasons, which we can talk about, but they do still come in, and so we still are leaning on them to keep that function of the office continuing forward. We are, I want to assure you, taking all the steps necessary to keep our staff safe and healthy when they do come in. We do still have very few people, as I mentioned at the outset, but we actually have had a few incidents arise that we've had to manage that could have affected our staff. And I want to turn it over to Brock Weidenheimer, our HR director, to just say a few quick words about that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Hey, Brock, just before we go into your section, I do see Commissioner McInerney has her hand up.
Great.
Was there a comment there, Eileen, that I missed that you can make?
No, my apologies. I thought that we were going to say some kind words for Joan and wanted to add my voice to the chorus, but no, not a question. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Eileen. I'm sorry I didn't let you spew on Joan. I'm trying to keep the meeting moving forward, but thank you. Brock, over to you.
Okay. No, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Just as Matt said, we're taking a number of precautions along with the state and the facilities groups to keep the office very safe. We have had 2 incidents come up where we have had to close our office since March, and both of those were where we had concerns about potential COVID exposures. In both cases, it was involving the family member of an employee who had been in the office. Fortunately, in both cases, the family member ended up being just fine. Our employees tested negative in both cases. So there were no broad concerns as it turned out, but we did in both cases implement some protocols and precautions that we've developed. So we did close the office. We notified all of our employees because we have committed to the employees that we'll keep everybody aware and informed when any possible situations do arise. And then the steps we take, we have our cleaning management company come in and do a deep cleaning of the office in both of these cases, and in particular in areas where the employee told us that they could have traveled during that day. But in general, the office is cleaned regularly, and that includes wiping down doorknobs and all, even when there's no special deep cleaning in place. But other steps we've taken, we've asked employees to only come in when they really have a real need to do that when necessary. And when they do come in, we ask them to notify their supervisor in advance so that we're aware the person will be in the office. We've developed a logbook that we have out in our entry area, in the lobby area, that all employees sign when they come in and when they leave. And that's primarily in case we do have an exposure or a concern, we can go back and determine who may have been in the office at that time, so we can make sure to notify them. We do ask employees to wear face masks when they're in the office, and particularly in public areas. And I guess the other point that Matt kind of raised earlier is that we do have an office that's set up to hold 80 people. and we very rarely have people in, or at least any big numbers. So it's usually 1, 2, 3 people in the office. So there really is a lot of opportunity for social distancing. So it feels safe. But we have, again, committed to notify employees. We've also asked or really instructed all employees to notify me in my role as the head of HR if there is a possible, if they might have been exposed, or if they feel that someone they're close to may have been, so that we can implement some of the precautions we talked about, and also keep employees informed. We treat that confidentially, so we don't share who might have been exposed, but we do just share the fact that there could have been an exposure, and that's so that we can be as transparent, just to be fully transparent with employees. And so, that's some of the work that we're doing there. We'll continue to monitor activity, and again, so far no significant issues, and hopefully that will be the ongoing case.
Thank you, Brock. What I might do is have folks hold questions to the end of Executive Director's report, if that's okay, so we can get through. We're going to run a little over here. I think we can manage it with the rest of the agenda, but we do have a number of other things to cover here. So we've referred a couple of times already in this meeting to our upcoming move, and we've discussed this a little bit before with the commission. The Hurley building that we inhabit and have inhabited for many years is being redeveloped. We were slated to move to the McCormick building at 1 Ashburton Place, the original plan being in 2022. I think the COVID crisis and the work that Joan will be leading around kind of the workforce environment is accelerating our plans and the plans of a few other agencies. I see this as a real positive for us, so that whenever we return to work, whenever that may be, it's actually not going to be here in the Hurley building, but will be at 1 Staniford Street. So I fully expect that our move, though the timing is fluid, will happen before the end of this fiscal year. There's a lot of work that we have to do. We have to make sure that the various work streams that we have ongoing don't get interrupted. We are mindful of proceeding with a move in light of the annual enrollment period that starts again next spring. So there's a lot of work to do. And what I would suggest is that we come back to you in October with a little bit more of a detailed presentation on what that looks like, either October or November, when things become a little bit clearer for us. But I do just want to acknowledge on my team, Maureen Quinn, who is managing that project, and all the various work streams that are related to that. So I won't go into much more detail here. Those details are to come. But it will be a big feature of our work in the through the remainder of this fiscal year for sure.
I know you wanted to hold questions, Matt, but Bobby has her hand
Yep.
raised.
Yep, that's fine.
Hi, Bobby.
Hi, it's not really a question. I just wanted for the record to say it's 1 Ashburton, because I heard, unless I heard incorrectly, Matt say 1 Staniford we're moving to. And I just wanted to correct for the record, 1 Ashburton.
Yes, sorry if I misspoke. Yes,
Okay.
1 expert in the McCormick building. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Good record keeping. Thank you, Bobby.
Moving on to another COVID-related item, as folks may recall, we took a number of steps as COVID hit to ensure that our members did not lose coverage. One of those steps that we took was to suspend terminations that would otherwise been processed for folks who had fallen behind on payment of their premium. I think our standard process would have allowed for a 60-day period before the termination of coverage. Given the extraordinary circumstances, we wanted to suspend that for a period of time. But of course, you can only do that for a certain length of time, right? You can't if folks have lost eligibility, we need to accommodate that. And, you know, if folks are ultimately wanting to maintain their coverage, we're concerned about this kind of growing balance of unpaid premium that they would need to pay back. So we were trying to kind of balance a number of different dynamics here. So we did ultimately kind of close that suspension of terminations and got back to normal business. And I want to turn it over to Paul Murphy, our Director of Operations, just to say a few words about how that played out.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. As Matt said, one of the areas we looked at is billings, just to see how we could help our members during the pandemic. To put it in perspective, to give you an idea, at the beginning of April through September 1st, GIC issued 31,546 billing invoices to our members for a wide variety of reasons: off payroll, suspension, on leave. So it's a great deal of number of bills that we send out. We did suspend the termination process, which is normal, as Matt said, 60 days in which we issue a termination notice. So for the months of April, May, and June, we did suspend the termination of non-payment for our members. So what that meant is members were given extra months and another reminding invoice to pay their premiums before we issue a termination. At the end of July, we did take a look at the outstanding balances that were over 60 days. And it turned out we had 1,100 members who had not paid their premiums since the beginning of April. So we thought it'd be best thing is to issue termination notices to the members to let them know that we can't continue to let the premiums go unpaid. So as you can imagine, when the bills went out, our phones were very busy. But I can give you an update that as of Monday this week, we have reinstated 615 out of the 1,100 members back on to GIC coverage. We also turned the process back on at the end of August, and we issued 370 termination notices during the normal 60-day cycle, and we have reinstated 148 members. So we are back on track. We are still working with the members to help them reinstate the coverage. But I will tell you, one of the things we did back in May, some of you recall that we turned on a new credit card system. So many members have found it easier to use credit card to pay their premiums and get their coverage reinstated a lot quicker than it would be to mail us a check and let the check be processed. So we've received over 3,500 payments through the credit card system since the beginning of May. And as of Monday, we broke a milestone and we received over $1 million in premium payments through the credit card system. So we are back on track. Things are moving along, and we continue to look at ways that we can help our members both work and remote and how we can improve some of the processes that we do for our members. So that's about it.
So I can't overstate how critical it has been to have stood up my GIC link and to have implemented online payment, given the challenges to our operations and working with our members that have been posed by this pandemic. It's hard for me to imagine how we could have operated as smoothly as we have been without those changes having been made. So thank you, Paul. Unless there's a question, I'll hand it over to Andrew to talk a little bit about just a brief update on our regulations, which we talked about in our last meeting. Andrew?
Sure. Very quickly. As given the authorization we received at the last meeting, we've been moving forward. Mark Tuttle has put together a very comprehensive timeline that anticipates September 23rd, we'll be filing our notice to the Local Government Advisory Committee, which begins the formal process. In the interim, we've already started circulating the drafts to municipal entities and other interested parties, and will continue to do so. We're looking for having public hearings the week of November 9th and concluding the process by coming back to the commission at the December 17th meeting for final approval of the minutes and then getting them propounded through the regulations division. And we'll provide status updates at each meeting in December.
Thank you, Andrew. So that process will continue. In the interest of time, I'll keep our communications and legislative updates very brief. On the communication side, I just want to note for folks that we completed the production and distribution of our 2019 annual report and are now have transitioned very quickly into producing the FY20 report, which we anticipate having by the end of the calendar year. I will thank several members of the commission who gave us some really good positive feedback on the design and the conciseness and the sort of visual nature of the report, which are all features that we expect to carry forward to the next annual report. We have also, on the communication side, during the last several months, we've been taking several opportunities to continue to promote our employee assistance program so we have 2 additional outgoing promotions as it relates to the EAP. One is an anti-stigma mental health communication, which will also serve as a reminder of the resources during this extraordinarily stressful time, particularly as we're going back to, as so many families are arranging having their kids back to school, and all of the complications that come with that. So there's the anti-stigma campaign and also sort of back to school during COVID. I will say, let me just say very briefly, as this came up in one of the pre-commission calls, that our EAP volume, while it saw an uptick in late March and into April, has not seen a dramatic change in its usage even during COVID-19. We continue to have general usage that's in the kind of low single digits of the percentage of our members that access the resource. I think part of the challenge for us is to continue to promote it. But I think we also, as we move forward through the procurement, as we'll talk about in a few moments, need to figure out a way that we can leverage an EAP to provide some real value to our members. So that's on communications, and I'll just say a brief word about the legislature, just to remind folks that our current status is that there's an extended formal session in the legislature through the end of the calendar year. The FY21 budget remains the central focus. We have a short-term budget authorization that runs through the end of October for the Commonwealth. I'm sure Emily and Secretary Heffernan and the budget team are hard at work with the legislature, dealing with a number of really challenging variables, certainly not least of which is trying to handicap what Congress and the President will do in terms of relief for states and municipalities. Of course, that is news that changes every day I pick up the newspaper, including this morning. So that continues to be a real major challenge. There are two major healthcare bills that were passed out by both chambers earlier this summer. There are a number of telehealth provisions in there, extending the emergency provisions around coverage for telehealth for a longer period, and a number of other provisions, many of which don't directly impact the GIC, but we're also watching those very closely. So we're already a little bit over. I want to stop there and take any more questions on the director's report. Anything that we've brought up here that folks want to chime in on?
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, whoever was speaking, that's fine.
It was me, of course. Sorry, I forgot to raise my hand.
That's okay.
I just want to say kudos to Paul Murphy and his staff doing an amazing job. I've had members contact me regarding, a cancellation notice, and I've, forwarded them immediately to Paul, and he's been able to resolve those issues, and he's been very responsive, and just kudos to him and to John Harney for getting, the credit card, the online payments up and running successfully. I've received a lot of very positive comments from our members regarding the online payments. So kudos to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just have a question regarding the EAP. I'm assuming webinars that EAP is promoting have not been well attended, and I don't know if it's has to do with people sort of feeling overwhelmed because everyone's working remotely, and there are a lot of courses that are mandatory that state employees have to participate in and complete, within a certain deadline. There are teleworking courses and all the usual, annual mandatory trainings, plus people are working. And I'm not sure if people can't quite fit it in, or if EAP is looking at, if Optum is looking at some other approach, because maybe what works in one part of the country does not work here. I'm trying to figure out why EAP is not that popular. I don't know exactly what it is. I was just curious if there have been discussions about trying some other approach.
Bobby, I think one of the reasons why our EAP isn't as well utilized is it's relatively new. It just is in the last couple of years that we offered an EAP, if you remember. So I think that's one issue. I think, staff may have other ideas to add to it. But I personally think we need to help our members as much as possible in every way possible, to support the strength of their mental health.
Right, I agree. I think it's really important. There was an article in the paper today regarding, depression and the weather. Once we get into cold, weather, that people who have a tendency to suffer from depression may be more depressed, and maybe there's just some confusion about what EAP is exactly. And how is it different from the other services that GIC provides?
Yeah. To that point, Bobby, we have noticed elsewhere that behavioral health services delivered by telemedicine is up dramatically. So while we may not see the type of increases in utilization for sort of managing stress, a little bit more sort of other sort of support type functions of the EAP, I would say the core benefit of behavioral health and treating behavioral health conditions that clearly have been on the rise through COVID-19. We are seeing people being treated for those. I think that will continue to be an area that we need to watch very, very closely for our members, and make sure that we're meeting their needs. There's no question about that. I think that the impacts here are going to be lasting, not temporary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.
Any other questions or comments by commissioners? Want to make sure you're heard. Okay, I think you can move on to calendar.
Great. So this is just a brief recap of kind of where we are on a number of the major procurement and contracting and implementation projects. Of course, today in the red box, we'll be updating you on a number of those. But this is also to illustrate to you that even the ones that we're talking about today are ones that we've had ongoing engagement with you at prior meetings. You will note here too that we have the October meeting as October the 15th with an asterisk if needed. I fully expect that it will be needed, and we, in consultation with our chair and several members, will be moving forward with that assumption. Next slide. So here we'll move into our discussion about benefit procurement and vendor management. And what I wanted to do here was to take the opportunity to start with a bit of an overview of our health benefits procurement. So I will provide some kind of context, kind of high level context, say a word about some of the changes that we're making. And then Denise Donnelly, our Director of Benefit Procurement and Vendor Management. I think that's definitely a title we got to change. She will update us on some of those specific procurements going forward. So next slide. Next slide. Perfect. So just a little overview of my overview. So why don't we just move to the next slide? I'll just get through it. So I thought it might be helpful just to start with a few kind of level set items that we are in year 3 of our 5-year contract with our health plans and our PBMs. Starting on July 1st, 2022, new coverage as a result of the coming procurement will take effect. So there's a lot that we have to do over the coming 2 years. And just to remind folks of the various elements here, we're not simply talking about our health plans, though they are core to this. We're also talking about our PBMs. So we have 6 health plans, we have 2 PBMs, we have taken steps in the past procurement to carve in behavioral health to our health plans. We've already talked about our EAP, and we want to think strategically about how the EAP fits into the mix of our other services that we offer to our members. We currently have, and we will continue to have, a consultant to help guide us and be a resource to us as we go through the coming health benefit procurement. Currently, that's, of course, Willis Towers Watson. And, you know, part of this effort, of course, has been the survey of our members that we're doing in partnership with Deloitte, our conjoint member survey. So I thought it might be helpful just as a brief kind of recap of where we are and what the pieces are. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of the key pieces, the key milestones, key work streams, I guess, as they relate specifically to the formal procurement process. You'll be able to see here how we're sort of generally sequencing the work in these different streams over the coming 2 years. And you'll see it's populated, of course, with the items that I mentioned on the previous slides. So I don't want to go in detail here. There are several moving parts. We are digging into kind of detailed planning now on how these parts fit together and will get us successfully through the next procurement. Next slide. So I thought it might be helpful to start a little bit with what we know today. And I don't think a lot of this will sound new to folks. These are the challenges that we've struggled with certainly since I've been on the commission, and I know long before I was involved with the GIC. Of course, cost to our members, to our agency partners, to the Commonwealth continues to be our top concern, and how we provide a quality, value, and benefit to our members that is sustainable, that carry the cost. We know that plans are complex, just as a product for our members to use. They are hard to understand and hard to navigate. They've gotten very complex over the years, and we hear that at our listening sessions and elsewhere. We know that plan design, particularly as it relates to cost sharing and networks, hasn't proven to be particularly successful in changing our members' behavior. So for instance, if we're placing a higher deductible on a high-cost provider in a tiered plan, we have not seen the consumer then follow that economic incentive and choose an equally a provider of equal quality with lower cost. So there are limits to that, and some reasons to be to sort of take a critical eye on that. Choice, we clearly know that members value choice among health plans, though we also note that the differentiation between the plans is quite limited. They are very close in terms of network. They're close in terms of in terms of the plans that they cover, the features of the plans. They are all highly rated for their quality and customer service nationally among the top rated plans in the country. So we know that that is something we've picked up along the way as well. Change around something as important and personal as access to healthcare through insurance causes a great deal of concern. We've certainly seen that. We know it can be a challenge to engage our members in a way that's sort of unique for the GIC compared to commercial coverage, because we do have this passive re-enrollment. If you don't want to change your plan in the coming annual enrollment period, you don't have to act. But if you work for a private employer or even, individual coverage through the state's merch market, you have to take proactive steps and shop and consider your options. So that's a dynamic that we have to acknowledge as well. And then the last three here are just sort of broader system observations that we continue to have a delivery system that is not particularly value-based. We have universally high quality across our provider systems, yet we have prices for this identical services that vary extremely widely. And brand of various providers features very heavily in the decisions that our members make. So that's a kind of core reality that we have to address. Healthcare disparities persist. We know they were here before COVID-19. I think we see in sharp relief what that means when the rubber meets the road in the middle of a pandemic. And we know that those are likely going to worsen. We know that COVID is going to have a major impact on the healthcare system. I think what it looks like to come is to be seen, but we know it's substantial. So these are some of the things that we have a sense of to varying degrees, lessons that I think collectively we've learned as a commission. Next slide. So there is still a lot that we do not know. I think we have some general sense of what our members prefer to see in their plan design, but there's a lot more that we need to understand there. So we should always be wanting to know more and update our understanding of what our members desire in their insurance coverage. what is the appetite for change actually now? So that's an important constraint, I guess, or at least something we want to understand better. We have, we've been operating pretty consistently now for a number of years with a fairly consistent offering. In order for us to address the challenges of the day, however, and provide value to our members, we may want to look at some significantly different options here, but we need to have a sense of what the appetite for change is among our various stakeholders. The landscape is changing due to COVID for sure, but it was changing before COVID. Mergers of healthcare delivery systems, mergers of our health carriers, different models that are emerging. It's a little bit later on the slide, between kind of collaborations between providers and carriers, some actually purchasing one another. And so that's a fluid market, and we want to make sure that we have a good sense of what is happening out in the marketplace. Next slide, and I'll pause in a moment. So of the things that we don't know, or the gaps of knowledge that we have, how do we fill those? And I think we do that through a robust engagement strategy. That's working with you as a commission over the coming 2 years. It's working closely to understand the preferences of our members and listen to our members, work in collaboration with our partners in labor and those that represent our retirees, our municipal partners, as well as our kind of partner agencies who purchase through the GIC. We have in Massachusetts an extraordinary opportunity to learn from some really sophisticated experts who understand the healthcare system. Our colleagues at the Health Policy Commission, Center for Health Information and Analysis, the Commonwealth Connector Authority, and EOHHS, doing a lot of work around behavioral health, system redesign, and certainly many others. So we want to learn what we can from our colleagues who are doing a lot of this work. Clearly, our health benefit consultant is going to continue to play an important role and be a resource for us. We've got our health plans and our PBMs who we will be meeting with over the coming month or so. Some of those have already begun. I want to listen to provider systems. What's happening on the provider side? Who's innovating in ways that provide real new value in the marketplace, and how can we support those things? And of course, we want to stay in touch with our colleagues in state government, both in the elected executive branch, but in the legislature. I put other here, of course, because this is not an exhaustive list. Probably more than we can, more touch points than we can get to, but it's there's a lot that we have to learn. Next slide. So I won't go too deeply into this other than to say that when you engage with stakeholders, there are a number of challenges there. One is that you set expectations, that everyone needs to understand the variety of constraints on our process, and that that we have to balance a number of different considerations. So engaging with people doesn't mean everybody gets what they want, right? That's not what the process really is designed to do. But we balance a number of considerations. As I've said to my team, we're not going to have as much time as we want to be able to do this work. We're always going to be running up against the clock. Just a huge amount of uncertainty about what's happening out in the environment, certainly related to COVID, but we'll be looking ahead to even 2 years. It's hard to know what the facts will be on the ground, to use the governor's phrase, around the pandemic, but all other key dynamics that we'll be dealing with. And then just lastly here, our procurement rules, of course, make this a challenging, it makes it challenging for us to engage in the way that without them, we would want to engage. It's just sort of a unique feature of our work.
Right, and I think that what you're mentioning is the importance of being engaged now as a commission, so that when the RFP or RFR is issued, that it's important to know that we have to stick to the rules that are established by the state.
That's right. That's right. I think we've bumped up against those before. Those are not going away. And as you're suggesting, those become tighter, much tighter constraints later on in the process. So we need to front load as much as we can, learning what we don't know. Next slide. So this is just a brief, I mean, these are things that I think folks know from our prior meetings, that we have been working on our member survey. We've been talking with our partners in labor about that survey, how to make sure it gives us the information that we need to understand what our members prefer. We are about to issue our RFR for our health benefit consultant. That will process that will play out over the winter and into the spring. We have our carrier and PBM meetings that I referred to earlier. That'll be happening. We've got another one tomorrow and a number throughout the month of October. We are transitioning our data warehouse, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we, a little bit in the background here, we continue to move forward to add capabilities to the Salesforce solution that we've put in place, my GIC link, DocuSign, just sort of trying to move away from paper-based processes to digital and self-service type activities to help our agencies and to help our members and help us, frankly, internally process our transactions relative to our members in an efficient way. So that is work that's all underway. Next slide. And this is, I think, my last slide from this section. So, so where do we go from here? I wanted, first of all, to use this opportunity to sort of signal that we are starting this procurement, right? And there's a lot of work to come. As I said, we've had some productive engagements with our partners in labor around the survey. There's been a real strong desire on labor to really dig in on this, to understand what the survey is designed to do. So we'll talk about this in a moment, but I think we're going to take a little bit more time to make sure that there's that we all have confidence and faith that this survey will provide the kind of information that we need. As I said, we're going to issue the RFR for the health benefit consultant. And this is an important one that I want to come back to you on, which is, we want to build out a real specific engagement plan that is going to make this, that is going to strengthen our procurement to come. That's going to, the types of conversations we've had with labor around the survey, I want to have broader conversations with them about the procurement. We want to sit more with retirees. I think we're going to have opportunities to consult all of those parties that I mentioned in that earlier slide. So my expectation would be to come back to the commission with a lot more detail on this in our next meeting and in November. The other two items, I've already mentioned. We're continuing to strengthen our data analytics capability and add functionality to Salesforce. So I'm going to stop there. Before I hand it over to Denise, who will touch on the specific procurements to come, the one that I will say just a word more on is the conjoint survey. So we had our original timeline was to have communications outgoing as soon as the end of this month. and to launch the survey in, I think it was the 19th of October. So we've just decided to delay that launch a little bit and consider what that means for the rest of our procurement process, how the various pieces fit together. So that is a little bit of a moving target, but rather than move it forward in a way that may feel rushed, to some, I want to take a moment to sort of have more discussions about the survey. So that is a work stream that relates to the procurement that is going to evolve a little bit. So with that said, I think what might be most helpful, if folks can be patient for just a moment, is to let Denise give her updates on the specific procurements, and then we've got some time set aside for Q&A and discussion, because I've put out a lot here.
Sure. Janine, would you please move the slide? So Matt has already touched on, oh, good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Denise.
Hi. Matt has already touched on the conjoint survey. So, and he's also mentioned that we will be releasing an RFR, we hope by the end of this month, on healthcare and prescription drug consultant. And that's by design structured because we're going to be launching the health plan and prescription drug plan procurement in fiscal year 22. Our current contract with Willis Towers Watson does not contain any more procurement processes. And so we need to engage a consultant to help us through that process, to shepherd us through that process. So that's by design. Life, long-term disability, dental, and vision are actually, those are bids that are out in the market now. And they're moving along as anticipated. And we are anticipating that we will bring recommended vendors to the commission for the December meeting. So that's all underway right now. Any questions from anyone? Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Sorry, I dutifully put myself on mute. Thank you, Denise, for that update. So we've touched on a lot here, so I do want to, we've got some time set aside for discussion, any feedback that you have. I'm particularly interested in feedback around how we can effectively engage with our stakeholders throughout this process. I think we've gotten some of those off to a good start. So interested what folks may have to share or observe.
Yeah, so I think Bobby has her hand up.
Yes, I did.
Toby next.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm very pleased, as I know my labor commissioners, my labor colleagues, are very pleased that the survey is that there's a delay in the survey so that we can have more input into this process. So I just wanted to say that I, on behalf of my colleagues, appreciate that you taking that approach. And I had a question for Denise regarding the long-term disability and the dental and vision. Is this is for the actual contracts, right? Not for a consultant to help us with the procurement. These are the bids that are out, the RFRs that are out.
Yes, Bobby, we actually conducted procurements for the consultants late last year and early this year and brought those recommendations to the commission. And now these are the actual plans themselves that are out for bid.
Okay, and when did the bid, what's the date of closure for the bids? What's the?
We just had our bidders conference on the dental and vision, and I believe the closure date is sometime in October. I can get you the actual dates. And we are just beginning the scoring process for the life and LTD plans. And as I said, we're hoping to bring both recommended vendors for both procurements, life, long-term disability, and dental vision to the commission in December.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Toby.
Matt, this is obviously a very uncertain and dynamic time, and I'm all supportive of your engagement strategy and the formality, surrounding the conjoint survey for our members. But you're going to be out there, and you and your staff are going to be out there talking to providers, talking to other regulators. I would find it very helpful if you could, like every meeting we come to, kind of say, here's some observations. It may not be definitive, it may not be final. It's more like, here's what I'm hearing in observations. And, it doesn't have to be attributable to any individual person. It could be, here's what the couple healthcare providers are telling me, what they're facing now and how they see the future. And I just think having a running dialogue from what you're hearing, in addition to getting formal feedback from the conjoint survey, I would find very helpful, like having a little just observation section of within the monthly meeting context. So that's just a request for you to consider.
That's super helpful, Toby, and actually very much aligned with what I've been thinking. I want to bring the commission along on this journey with us, to be candid, and sharing what we learn along the way will be an important part of that process. So I like your suggestion about having it as, from here on out as a formal section of our future meetings. I'm happy to do that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Good comment, Toby. Tim, you have your hand up, so go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. Well, just a comment. Number one, I'm appreciative of the way that we're moving forward with procurement, because as we know, or many of you know, I was not a fan of how the procurement went the last time. I'm very pleased with the conjoint survey, but what I'll be interested in terms of taking a look at our consultant, as to how the final questions are formulated and how we're going to know that the results are valid. So I'm going to be interested to hear from our consultants on all of that. The one question I would have for Matt, just for my own knowledge, you had mentioned going forward with, working with labor. Do you already have any scheduled, regularly scheduled meetings with the stakeholders at this point in time, given the constraints of the timeline that we're in at this particular point?
So, no, I don't have them on the schedule as we speak right now. I think what we had been driving towards was scheduling time very soon to do another session on the conjoint survey. Now that we have made the decision to delay that a bit, I think it gives us a little more time to schedule that discussion. But what I'd like to do is to work with you and Bobby and other labor members of the board and others in the kind of labor orbit to have broader discussions. I think, the series of challenges that I laid out in the overview here are sort of the facts on the ground as we know them. And, but I think what can proceed with future meetings with labor are a series of discussion questions where we can learn more about kind of the primary concerns of labor. So I would hope to have something on the books, as soon as the next couple weeks, and look to you all to help me kind of think through how that could be most productive.
Thank you.
And My comment is, Matt, it has been laid out very well. I do like the transparency and the direct approach that there is a new procurement coming and we have to abide by those procurement rules. And so prior to the execution of the RFR and going into the process, we do want to engage all of our members, our commissioners, very clearly our labor stakeholders. And I just want to remind all of us that at listening sessions, we consistently hear that our members are frustrated by the high cost of healthcare, by the challenges with access, and that some of it is outside of the control of the GIC because it really is a complaint that extends beyond just our population and our stakeholders, which we care about very much. So I'm going to ask you to be very open-minded about change, because there are some ways we can reduce the cost of healthcare that is not adding any significant value to our members. And so, that may involve things that make us a little bit uncomfortable, but I'll just ask you, and especially my labor colleagues, to be open-minded and not think that it has to stay the same way in order for it to still work. And we have the sales force, the way to engage members like we've never had before. So I'm just going to ask us, all of us collectively, to be really committed to our members and committed to listening to them, but knowing that there might be some discomfort of change short term, but long term, it might be even better. And I don't even know what it is. I'm just asking for us to be open-minded to that. And on that note, I'll pass it over to Eileen. I see her hand up, and then Joe, and then Bobby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to add that I do think it's important when we talk about the upcoming sessions that they be termed informational sessions and not really listening sessions, because while listening is critically important, I think equally important is the educational component that we need to provide. I heard a lot of frustration with the cost, but I also heard either lack of understanding or perhaps like not realizing why we were structuring things the way we were or what the intent is. And I do think it's really important, particularly in this time of the pandemic, because I think there will be some fundamental changes that occur to healthcare as a result of this. I think, use of telehealth, for instance, may be one. But anyway, I do think it's important that we see the role of the upcoming sessions as twofold. Listening is important, but equally important is education.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Eileen. And it's a bit of an overused word from me, and I'm certainly for me, but like when I think of engagement, it connotes two things, kind of a two-way street, right? So our challenge is not simply communication, and it is not simply listening, but involves both. And core to that is helping people understand the variables that we control and the ones that we don't. So a good example, I think, here is, contribution percentages are a really important variable here in how the cost burden is borne, but it's not a variable over which the GIC has any control. So that's one example of the importance of educating. So that is certainly the way I think of it, Eileen, is the way you express it. And we will carry that forward. Right to not simply calling them listening sessions.
Go ahead, Joe. And then I see Jane after Bobby.
So I just wanted to say too, that I appreciate the approach being taken this time. I think, and I recognize that change is something that's difficult for people. And the more we know and the sooner we know it, the more likely we can get our constituents to understand that the change is beneficial to them. So I do appreciate that you're going to try to bring us along through this whole process.
Thank you, Joe.
Go ahead, Bobby, and then Jane.
Sure. I actually want to piggyback on what Joe just expressed, which is that, you know, labor actually does have an open mind. It's when we're not informed or we're not allowed to participate that we may not be quite as open. However, when we are part of the process, then we are very open to listening, and we are also open to change. So I want to say that. And also regarding the cost factor, because we anticipate that there are going to be many changes and certainly multiple variables that we don't even know about right now. And I've said this before, you know, if we were able to, because many people may be overpaying, they may be selecting a carrier or a plan that is not really in their best interest, that they don't really need. And, you know, conversely, it could be people who don't have enough insurance for what they need, or they don't have the right plan. And I think if there were a way, you know, to provide more assistance through better communication, or perhaps more sessions, or you know, something like that, because I think a lot of people need help, and it's also another way of reducing costs, possibly, for our members.
Bobby. Go ahead, Jane.
Actually, Bobby's point was exactly what I was going to pick up on. I think all of us are open-minded. But as the conversation was directed to thinking about how much should be listening and how much should be information sharing, my view is that we need to weigh heavily on the listening side, particularly in this time. That some of us hear ourselves so much that we dominate the conversation and we don't listen. And I suppose, admittedly, my opinion is based on the work that I do in the area of diversity, equity, justice, and belonging. And it's sort of founded on foundational principles that suggest the power of recognition and witness. And so, you know, for those of you who are into this, our understanding of witness comes from many cultural and philosophical traditions that emphasize, you know, sort of our fundamental interdependence. And we really believe that in order for us to have a sense about what we could possibly do for people, we have to listen to what they say. And so I'd urge us to listen carefully. When I think about retirees in particular, during this moment, there may be issues that may be nuanced and even different than what may have happened months ago. So that's really where I'm coming from. I think we want to be sure that we feel in these listening tours, if we call them that all people are having an opportunity to be heard and seen and respected and cared for and valued.
That's excellent, excellent points, Commissioner Edmonds, and appreciate you and the work that you do on inclusion and diversity and equity. It's really good. So thank you. So Anna, I see your hand is up and would like you to weigh in.
Thanks everyone. Yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of build on these points. I think that the opportunity to really learn about what's out in the market and how to be innovative in health plan design is really exciting, and the GIC can be a leader in the market on that. And so I really encourage this plan. I like it a lot. And I think that the point that we're sort of hearing about education and how you communicate with members is really almost like a second component. It's like, first, what makes sense for the GIC to offer its members? And then part two is, how do we communicate and help members sort of make plan choices? And so you can do that. I think that help through that process is really important. I know that sometimes navigator services or having resources available to members to help them through the plan choice process can make a big difference, rather than just telling people about it. And so I would encourage us to think about that as sort of the second component following procurement. Like, let's be really thoughtful and comprehensive in terms of how we roll out whatever comes from procurement to the members, to really make sure people land where they should land.
I think that's great.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Matt. I don't see any other discussion points among our commissioners. So, thank you to all staff and commissioners for the transparency. And I think we are aligned on, the next steps, and look forward to every meeting getting briefed and being inclusive.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Thank you for that, Valerie. If I could just say one other comment, just wrapping this up, which is that this is exactly the kind of conversation, discussion, sort of a little bit of open-ended exploring with you that I want to make a regular feature of these commission meetings going forward. We will live within the four corners of the time available to us for sure, but I have wanted to feel, just to make sure that we're not feeling rushed as we get through some of these complex topics, number one, and everyone is heard, number two, but also that we can benefit from your expertise. So Anna, you're talking about kind of the importance of having a really thoughtful approach about preparing our members to be able to use their benefits as they're designed, right? To bring the most value to them, to make those right decisions. And some of the research that you're doing about the complexity of plans and the challenge that individuals have and just navigating their plans, like, I want to benefit from that. We can benefit from that. So I really see you as a panel of 17 experts, in addition to the other experts that we will engage. And I want to have that as a permanent feature of the commission meetings going forward. So thank you all for that feedback.
I think 30 minutes left of the meeting. So
yep.
If there isn't anything else on this section, we can move forward.
So here we will hear from Andrew, as I said at the outset, with an update on the data warehouse. As I think commissioners will recall, when we last discussed this topic, we were proceeding with a vote to authorize the staff to negotiate or enter into negotiations with Milliman, the second apparent successful bidder, and with Optum on a short-term kind of transition contract. And we wanted to circle back to let you know how that had proceeded. So turn it over to Andrew to sort of remind us a little bit about some of the key facts and update us on how those discussions and negotiations have gone. Andrew?
Okay, I'm going to try to be quick. I am having some issues where I keep getting kicked out of my camera and mic, so if I get lost, let me know. Just to put things back in context, our current contract, or our contract with Optum, was expiring on June 30th, 2020. So we had to go out to procure, which we did in October of 2019. We had come to you at the February meeting and you authorized us to move forward with trying to negotiate a contract with Optum, which unfortunately we were unsuccessful at doing so. And then in June, you authorized us to move forward with trying to negotiate with Milliman, who is the second highest bidder. In the interim, I'm hoping you can still hear me. I'm just getting bounced here. We did get a bridge contract signed with Optum by July 1st, so there was no lapse in our contract, our access to the warehouse. And that will go through the end of the year if necessary. We're fairly confident that won't be necessary, but we are in good shape. Go to the next slide. So following our June meeting, I went back to Milliman. I was able to get a 10% reduction on the licensing fees beyond what they had offered in the best and final offer, which saves the Commonwealth about $80,000 a year, which we would like to see leveraged to get Margaret some help and beef up our internal analytical unit. We, in exchange, contracted for a fixed 5 years. So the pricing has been negotiated and set and unchanged for the 5-year period, which is actually a good thing for us. And in addition, we might be able to save a little more money by using the prompt payment discount, which will be another 4%. So all that was to the good. Some of the things that we were able to do during the negotiations was to modify their licensing agreement to accommodate our data issues that we were unable to resolve with Milliman, and everything went satisfactory, and we reached a nice agreement on our ownership of our data and our use of our data. We also had to work on liability of limitation language to bring the contract in conformance with a new IT Commonwealth view of those provisions, and that went smoothly. And lastly, we modified the business associate agreement, which the company's standard agreement would have had us responsible for handling all notifications if there were breaches, and we pushed that back on Milliman. And we will do mailings if our, God forbid, had a member side breach, but they would pay for it and prepare all the correspondence. We just would maintain access to who our membership is and be able to send that out. So that all was good. And the maximum obligation for the 5 years is now $4,820,752. And I hope everybody heard that, and that is a summary of where we are. And then Margaret will be able to tell you what's happened towards implementing and transitioning the contract.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Well, the headline is that implementation with Milliman is going very well, I'm happy to say. We have, please pardon my terrier in the background. We have an aggressive implementation timeline with our data warehouse hosted by Milliman being up and ready at the end of the year. We are currently in the process of finishing up defining the file specifications with each of the carriers and starting to import data into our new data warehouse. Milliman is making my life much, much easier. They are very good project managers. They have a great sense of big picture where we want to be, and they're also really good at dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. And so I'm able to just turn it over to them and kind of ride along rather than having to steer the ship the whole time. That's helping me a lot, freeing me up a lot. And I would also say the carriers are really stepping up too. And I want to give a shout out to the carriers. You know, this is a busy time for them, but everyone is rallying, both the account managers and the data team. They're working really hard to get us the data we need, and in some cases leveraging extra resources to help us meet our timeline and complete the project accurately. and on time. So I want to thank the carriers, especially in this effort. Happy to take questions.
I am happy to hear that it's taking work from you, because we know that you do a lot of work and this is a very important initiative. So I'm glad to hear that it's going well. And, you know, Andrew, you saved us some money on the negotiation. So I think it's a good report out. Thank you. I don't see any other commissioners with questions or comments, so we can move to the next section.
Great. So here we will hear from Jim Russell, recap of our FY20 budget, some of the status of our current fiscal year. That will also include a brief presentation from our partners at or our vendor partners, how's that, at Willis Towers Watson, with some insights on the impact on claims, and a brief report on temporary staff reporting. Andrew, Jim.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to kind of go in reverse order here. I'll do the temporary staff reporting very quickly at the beginning here so we can get into the budget stuff. We currently have 2 temporary staff employees, which is down from 7 at this time last year. Of those 2, 1 is actually transitioning to a full-time status, permanent status. So we should be down to 1 temporary employee soon. And we don't have any current plans to add to the temporary workforce at the moment. So that is temporary staff reporting. Next slide, please, Janine. So this slide, I know you've all seen before, but this is the whole year of FY20, and I won't read you all these numbers. You can do that at your leisure, but it basically shows by plan what our claims volume was, and I've highlighted in the red circle the months that were impacted by COVID, and I'm going to talk about that, as will Vince Kane from WTW, as we go along. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but it is good to see the numbers that are going to be behind the graphs that I'm going to show next. Next slide, please. So this is the usual slide that I would show you that shows our seasonality and our claims by month. But since we're at the end of the year, we can give you some final results. And of course, since it wasn't a normal year at all because of the COVID-19 impact, I've highlighted the COVID area on the right. As you can see, for most of the year, to the left of the dotted line, we were trending slightly above budget. So the red line was above the blue line. And then you can see the impact of COVID kind of in late March and into April. Since claims lag a little bit, you can see the claims volume just plummet before recovering to a certain level in May and June, where the separation between the blue and the red line is pretty consistent. So that's the level that we ended up at through most of the summer as well. So I think this is a good visualization of the COVID claims volume and the impact COVID had on that, deferred care and all those kind of things. We see the swing between where we would have been without COVID and the impact of COVID of $100+ million. So at the end of the year, if there had not been a COVID impact, we think we would have been over budget, maybe $30 to $50 million. And as you'll see at the end of this presentation, we ended up under budget by about $70 million. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic representation of the red line being kind of a straight line of average claims. You know, our claims are very noisy, as I tell you all the time. There's a lot of volatility, but on average, the red line would be where we would have been when COVID began. And the blue line is what we actually had. So you can see, although there's some noise along the way, we're well below our average claims for right through August. But if you do see the tail end, if I put a trend line on this, you would see that it is going up on a slow pace towards the end of the year. And we're going to keep an eye on that. But we do see some claims volume recovering. Next slide, please. So this is the slide, as you all may remember, that I like a lot because it shows basically the size of our budget. Our budget is $2.1 billion. So a $70 million variance is about 3%, and it does, and even a variance like that does not impact our budget substantially. It's a pretty good result, but COVID, again, being such a large impact in a short time, you can see the lines actually divert, which they almost never do over the last couple of months. Next slide, please. And these are the numbers behind the graph. As I mentioned earlier, we ended up under budget by about $71 million. Again, wholly attributable to the decrease in claims due to COVID. Again, that swing we estimate at about 100 million or more dollars that we would have ended up over budget by 30 to 50 million dollars. And at this point, I went quickly through that as I often do here at the end of the meeting, but I'm happy to take a few questions. But I think it'd be important for us to also make time for Vince Kane at WTW, who's going to do a more macro and detailed analysis of the impact of COVID. But I will pause here if anyone has questions on my few slides.
Don't see any question. Oh, wait a minute. I see Toby. Hey, Toby, go ahead.
Hi, Jim. Do you have just a sense of the costs attributable to COVID? You've had the deferral of costs, but.
Yep. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Toby. Sorry.
No, that's it. That was the question. Do you have any sense of the cost directly contributed to it?
So FY20, we're still working with the providers. There's a lot of some people here know better than me, a lot of kind of coding that needs to be gone through to really things to COVID and whatnot. And we are working, the plans are being very responsive, working with us on this, but we see it total at about $48 million in claims so far, $26 million of that being FY20 and 21 so far in FY21. And again, that's not fully complete, so that number will move around a little bit, but that's where we stand now. We do track it and we report it to the state comptroller's office. We flag those claims payments as COVID-related claims in case in the future there was ever any opportunity for federal reimbursement or those kind of things. So we do have a handle on it. Again, the plans are doing a great job with us reporting on it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Vince Kane. Vince is our consultant at WTW, who does a great job for us, helping us do the things that we do to project the budget and to work with A&F to make a budget for the. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there another question?
Yeah. So Bobby has her hand up. If we could just let her make
Sure.
her.
Yes, Jim, I was just wondering if you could include that in the next, for future reports, like what the cost of COVID is.
Yes, that'll be a monthly update in the future reports for sure.
All right, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to turn it over to Vince now. As I mentioned, Vince helps us. As you know, we've had a pretty good track record of forecasting budgets the last few years at least, and Vince and his team are indispensable towards that work. So without further ado, Vince, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim, and thank you to the GIC team and the Commission for having me here this morning to talk about the financial impact of COVID. Next slide. So, it's clear that there's been a material impact in FY20, as Jim just highlighted. When we started trying to project what we thought the cost would be for the GIC, we were working back in March and April with very limited data, trying to understand for your population what the claims costs would be associated with COVID care and testing and waiver of cost share, as well as what the displaced care might be and how much of that might come back in 2020 and also FY21. Now we have the benefit of looking in the rearview mirror a bit and trying to assess at least an estimate for FY20 around how much care actually went away. And as Jim mentioned, what the plans are reporting as the direct cost for COVID care. But now going forward into FY21, the question is how much of the deferred care will actually be gone for good versus come back, and what are some different scenarios we could consider, that we might be able to model the financial impact going forward. And clearly, there's a lot of different ways this can play out, especially in the geographic footprint of the GIC membership. We've modeled a few scenarios that they're not meant to represent the universe of potential scenarios, and we certainly wouldn't attach probabilities to these. Scenario one is kind of, current state. We view this as a single wave that led to a significant shutdown and displacement of care in the fourth quarter of the fiscal year. And we're still seeing, a steady stream of daily infections that impact GIC members and continuing payment of claims related to COVID services. Scenario two is a little bit more dire. It envisions sort of a second wave of similar magnitude to what we had in the spring, but with sort of a lower level of overall claims suppression associated with the fact that healthcare delivery systems understand how to potentially still treat members, and we wouldn't have as much of a shutdown as we did in the spring. Scenario 3 is sort of the worst case, at least in the modeling that we did here, where we would expect a wave to be twice as large as the first one, and with a similar level of claims suppression that we had in FY20. So the gist of this, and I know we're limited on time, is that we did have a favorable cost variance for FY20. The expectation is that FY21 will be higher than it would have otherwise, but net, over the 2 years, most of our modeling is indicating that costs would be lower over the 2 fiscal years than they would have been in a non-COVID world. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty around what the healthcare delivery system can do to service the pent-up demand, and what's coming downstream as far as effective vaccines and treatments. Next slide. So we were able to look at sort of a national view and also a regional view of the experience of about 200 of our clients at Willis Towers Watson to see how their claims have fallen off in the same time period that we were analyzing for fiscal year Q4 for the GIC. And these percentages reflect sort of a decrease over prior PEPY or PEPM levels for those months. You can see that, across the country, there was a big fall off in claims. Nationally, in the box in the lower left for the entire US, we had about a 21% drop in April, 29% in May, and 14% in June. This is despite the fact that most of the direct COVID claims and infections were happening in the Northeast. You can see the Northeast was at 27, 32, and 16. And in the top right sort of box there for the GIC, the fall off for the GIC in the same months was very much consistent with the Northeast. So, this is a national phenomenon. For the GIC specifically, when we imputed the claims for carriers that weren't reporting all of the COVID claims, we estimated about 58 million in COVID care, waiver of cost share, and testing for FY20. That was more than offset by the green number there, the 172 million, which we estimated by developing kind of a counterfactual non-COVID spend for Q4, and then comparing that to what we actually had. When you net those two numbers out, it's about $100 million, as Jim already pointed out, favorable. Moving on to the next slide. So I won't touch on all of these items because I think many of them have come up in the discussion today, particularly around the uncertainty of what will happen to the health status of GIC's members, especially from sort of a chronic care management and behavioral health perspective, as well as the uncertainty around where we go from here with regard to telehealth, shifts in the healthcare delivery system, negotiated contracted prices with hospitals and provider groups, and what other sort of factors might increase or reduce costs going forward. There'll also be potential for an uptick in covered members for the GIC if folks have lost their coverage through their employers and joined as spouses onto the GIC enrollment. All of this is kind of in the backdrop of what happens from an additional wave of infections and what that might mean for interfering with the catch-up of pent-up demand from the first wave, as well as triggering an additional sort of displacement of care in FY21. Next slide. This is kind of an illustrative chart to highlight some of our thinking back in March and April for specific service categories such as office visits, ER, and sort of elective surgeries on what we expected to see for a fall off on kind of an incurred monthly basis. So, the 0% line in the middle of that bar chart is kind of the normal level of utilization. And then what we anticipated seeing, for example, with these purple bars is a fall off beginning in March, peaking in April with that 60% drop, and then kind of rebounding over time as the economy in Massachusetts began opening up and people began seeking some of the deferred care. The purple bars go over expectations when the healthcare system is able to open, potentially address the pent-up demand, increase capacity, and members are willing to actually seek the care that had been displaced initially in the spring. So the net effect at the end of the year is likely a decrease due to this sort of component of the financial work, which is displacement of care. This doesn't take into account the direct COVID claims. Next slide. So in the scenarios we modeled, and focusing on scenario 1 for now, what we tried to estimate is of the 170 million or so of claims that went away, what percentage might come back in FY21? So, we modeled that as about 20% to 60% of what went away coming back. And that created a range of results. When we layered on the sort of run out of COVID claims from the first wave and the ongoing costs of continuing lower levels of infection affecting GIC members, the total FY21 impact in scenario one, which is the second line from the bottom, is about 60 to $130 million. When you then add on the favorable $114 million variance for FY20 to those numbers, the range is basically minus 51 million to 17. So we're on both sides of zero for a 2-year financial impact. As we shift right to the more dire scenarios that model out a second wave of infections, you can see that the total impact is not significantly larger than scenario one. There's actually this sort of immunizing effect from a financial perspective, whereby the additional displaced care and the recoupment of pent-up demand in FY21 is offset by direct COVID care, but not significantly so. And so moving from left to right, you can see that even with a significant uptick in infections, this ends up getting offset by additional displacement of care and other factors that might mitigate trend, so that we're still on both sides of zero for the modeled scenarios over a 2-year view. So there's a lot of background and moving parts to the modeling, but this is sort of the high level. This is all just looking at aggregate claims projections and aggregate COVID claims. We're not looking at specific outcomes for members, their health status, what the what the long-term treatment costs might be for people who've been impacted by COVID, and of course changes in the healthcare delivery system. So lots of caveats around this, but I do think it helps for us to understand for FY21 what we are expecting to see, and then start framing our discussion for pricing for FY22, for rates effective next July 1 in 2021. So that's all I have for prepared materials on the COVID financial impact.
We've just got just 7 minutes or so left in our time. I just want to say one thing, which one of the key takeaways I think for me on this is that the additional claims cost that relates to treatment of presumably testing and treatment of those members relative to COVID has been a fairly modest factor, and the bigger factor really is the deferral of care in the short term, which leads to a depression in claims, and then relatedly, how much of that deferred care actually returns as new care on top of what we would otherwise expect, even irrespective of COVID, right? So, and that's what makes the modeling such a challenge, because it's the deferral of care is heavily dependent on the course that the pandemic actually takes. So you end up with these fairly wide ranges, but it's not hard to imagine or understand why some portion of deferred care just will never be delivered care. Care for people with a chronic disease will continue when it continues, but there's not additional chronic care. So that was one of the kind of my big takeaways from this as we went through it. But I'm going to stop talking. There's a lot to go into here, so if folks have questions.
Yeah, I don't see questions. I think it's good information. I'm glad that we're taking a forward look so that we're not unprepared from a budget perspective.
This really does invite study, so I would encourage folks to spend some time with it. There are some additional background slides that if folks want to see, we can certainly share. I want to note Bobby's suggestion earlier to provide some specific information around COVID-related treatment claims. I can foresee a fairly standard report that we can include on in future commission packets that's specific to a variety of metrics relative to COVID, and some of them can include, impacts on claims here. So we'll give that some thought and plan to come back to you in October with our first crack at that.
Thank you. And thanks for being on top of this. And thanks Willis Towers Watson for being our vendor partner on this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
So this is the last real substantive slide here, and it's just a reminder of our meeting schedules to come. There's actually a calendar right behind this one, but I will note that we will kind of note the obvious. We will continue to meet in a remote fashion until further notice, until something substantively changed that would allow us to do something different. We've now got a handful of meetings using the Zoom platform, and looks like we've got some pretty good kind of a routine with this. I guess I would just ask commission members if there is some feature of the way that we're conducting these meetings that you would recommend we do a little bit differently. We are all ears for that. And I think the only other thing to note is just to reiterate what I had said earlier, which is that our October meeting, which had been sort of had a question mark around it, we are proceeding with understanding that we will have an October meeting. So would look forward to seeing you again. I think it's on the 15th of October.
Okay.
Any closing thoughts, recommendations?
I like that we're staying on time because it's important for planning. I had thought I saw Christie's hand come up and then it came down. Was there anything substantial or necessary or quickly that you'd like to say, Christy?
It can wait till another time. It was just me wondering how people not getting care translates into more complex medical issues down the road because they haven't received preventative care along the way, like a mammogram or screening. But it is something that can wait for another time. But
yeah, it's actually, that is one of the variables you'll note in this slide of different dynamics, and it is one that we'll be watching closely. That is an important feature. If you're not managing your chronic care well, that has implications down the road for your health and your health claims.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, Christy. Go ahead, Anna. Our health economist was going to make a follow-on comment to Christy, so I don't want to be like the timekeeper and stop good conversation. So Anna, please.
And Bobby's hand is up as well.
Okay, so Anna, you'll save that for next time because we will have follow-up on that. I'm sure WTW will get us that information. It's got to be something that's really being followed with a lot of interest. Go ahead, Bobby.
I just wanted to ask about, the behavioral health providers for behavioral health. Has there been any increase, I guess, in the network? Because I'm concerned about the out-of-pocket costs for behavioral health.
Mm-hmm.
Because many people are they're just not finding the providers, or the providers are no longer taking new patients. And so I was just curious about what has been going on in the behavioral health field. I know it's a very difficult topic because there's no way to force mental health providers to join or to provide services through our carriers. So I am concerned about that because some people have expressed the high cost, right? The out-of-pocket expenses for behavioral health services.
Thank you, Bobby. It's a great question. It's one that I actually worked on a great deal in my prior roles at Harvard Pilgrim and at the Division of Insurance. And it's a good reminder that as we head into our stewardship meetings with our health plans over the next 6 weeks, that we will use that opportunity to learn more from the carriers about what is happening in this space. So if not in our October meeting, perhaps in our November meeting, we can report back to you on what we're learning there.
Good. Okay. I see no other hands up from our commissioners. Do we want to advance the slide?
Bobby's hand is up, I think, or at least her physical hand was up.
Oh, go ahead, Bobby.
Sorry, I just wanted to commend GIC staff. Very comprehensive information we received today. And I just want to express my appreciation because you've done this in a very complicated and crazy time. So with everyone working remotely. So I want to just say thank you to all GIC staff and as well as Towers Watson for getting this to us and providing all this information. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Bobby. I will be sure to share that with the entire staff here. Appreciate that.
Yes, no, thank you, Bobby. Well said, well expressed. I'm sure you share, what all of us as commissioners feel. So at this time, if there are no other comments or questions, I am going to call the meeting adjourned and wish you a lovely fall transition from, the summer to the fall, and we'll see you in October. Okay? Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.